Hiber-Nation 58. Grizzly's Growls presents Stories from the Hiber-Nation. Read by David Grizzly Smith. Wild Animals I Have Known by Ernest Thompson Seton, as read by David Grizzly Smith. Wully, the story of a Yaller dog. Wully was a little Yaller dog. Now, a Yaller dog, be it understood, is not necessarily the same as a yellow dog. He is not simply a canine whose capillary covering is highly charged with yellow pigment. He is the mongrelest mixture of all mongrels, the least common multiple of all dogs, the breedless union of all breeds. Though of no breed at all, he is yet of older, better breed than any of his aristocratic relations, for he is nature's attempt to restore the ancestral jackal, the parent stock of all dogs. Indeed, the scientific name of the jackal, Canis aureus, means simply yellow dog, and not a few of that animal's characteristics are seen in his domesticated representative. For the plebeian cur is shrewd, active, hardy, and far better equipped for the real struggle of life than any of his thoroughbred kinsmen. If we were to abandon a Yaller dog, a greyhound, and a bulldog on a desert island, which of them, after 6 months, would be alive and well? Unquestionably, it would be the despised yellow cur. He has not the speed of the greyhound, but neither does he bear the seeds of lung and skin diseases. He has not the strength or reckless courage of the bulldog, but he has something 1,000 times better. He has common sense. Health and wit are no mean equipment for the life struggle, and when the dog world is not managed by man, they have never yet failed to bring out the yellow mongrel as the sole and triumphant survivor. Once in a while, the reversion to the jackal type is more complete, and the Yaller dog has pricked and pointed ears. Beware of him then. He is cunning and plucky and can bite like a wolf. There is a strange wild streak in his nature, too, that under cruelty or long adversity may develop into the deadliest treachery in spite of the better traits that are the foundation of man's love for the dog. Part 1. Away up in the Cheviots, little Wully was born. He and one other of the litter were kept, his brother because he resembled the best dog in the vicinity, and himself because he was a little yellow beauty. His early life was that of a sheepdog, in company with an experienced collie who trained him, and an old shepherd who was scarcely inferior to them in intelligence. By the time he was 2 years old, Wully was full grown and had taken a thorough course in sheep. He knew them from ram horn to lamb hoof, and old Robin, his master, at length had such confidence in his sagacity that he would frequently stay at the tavern all night, while Wully guarded the woolly idiots in the hills. His education had been wisely bestowed, and in most ways he was a very bright little dog with a future before him. Yet he never learned to despise that addle-pated Robin. The old shepherd, with all his faults, his continual striving after his ideal state, intoxication, and his mind-shriveling life in general, was rarely brutal to Wully, and Wully repaid him with an exaggerated worship that the greatest and wisest in the land would have aspired to in vain. Wully could not have imagined any greater being than Robin, and yet for the sum of 5 shillings a week all Robin's vital energy and mental force were pledged to the service of a not very great cattle and sheep dealer, the real proprietor of Wully's charge. And when this man, really less great than the neighbouring laird, ordered Robin to drive his flock by stages to the Yorkshire moors and markets, of all the 376 mentalities concerned, Wully's was the most interested and interesting. The journey through Northumberland was uneventful. At the River Tyne the sheep were driven onto the ferry and landed safely in smoky South Shields. The great factory chimneys were just starting up for the day and belching out fog banks and thunder rollers of opaque leaden smoke that darkened the air and hung low like a storm cloud over the streets. The sheep thought they recognized the fuming dun of the unusually heavy Cheviot storm. They became alarmed, and in spite of their keepers stampeded through the town in 374 different directions. Robin was vexed to the innermost recesses of his tiny soul. He stared stupidly after the sheep for half a minute, and then gave the order, "Wully, fetch him in." And after this mental effort he sat down, lit his pipe, and taking out his knitting, began work on a half-finished sock. To Wully, the voice of Robin was the voice of God. After he ran in 374 different directions, headed off and rounded up the 374 different wanderers, and brought them back to the ferry house before Robin, who was stolidly watching the process, had toed off his sock. Finally, Wully, not Robin, gave the sign that all were in. The old shepherd proceeded to count them. 370, 371, 372, 373. "Wully," he said reproachfully, "they're no all here. There's another." And Wully, stung with shame, bounded off to scour the whole city for the missing one. He was not long gone when a small boy pointed out to Robin that the sheep were all there, the whole 374. Well, now Robin was in a quandary. His order was to hasten on to Yorkshire, and yet he knew that Wully's pride would prevent his coming back without another sheep, even if he had to steal it. Such things had happened before, and resulted in embarrassing complications. There were 5 shillings a week at stake. Wully was a good dog. It was a pity to lose him, but then his orders from the master, and again, if Wully stole an extra sheep to make up the number, then what? In a foreign land, too. He decided to abandon Wully and push on alone with the sheep. And how he fared no one knows or cares. Meanwhile, Wully careered through miles of streets, hunting in vain for his lost sheep. All day he searched, and at night, famished and worn out, he sneaked shamefacedly back to the ferry, only to find that his master and sheep had gone. His sorrow was pitiful to see. He ran about whimpering, then took the ferry boat across to the other side and searched everywhere for Robin. He returned to South Shields and searched there, and spent the rest of the night seeking for his wretched idol. The next day he continued his search. He crossed and recrossed the river many times. He watched and smelt everyone that came over, and with significant shrewdness he sought increasingly in the neighborhood taverns for his master. The next day he set to work systematically to smell everyone that might cross the ferry. Well, the ferry makes 50 trips a day, with an average of 100 persons a trip, yet never once did Wully fail to be on the gangplank and smell every pair of legs that crossed. 5,000 pairs, 10,000 legs that day did Wully examine after his own fashion, and the next day, and the next, and all the week he kept his post, and seemed indifferent to feeding himself. Soon starvation and worry began to tell on him. He grew thin and ill-tempered. No one could touch him, and any attempt to interfere with his daily occupation of leg-smelling roused him to desperation. Day after day, week after week, Wully watched and waited for his master, who never came. The ferrymen learned to respect Wully's fidelity. At first he scorned their preferred food and shelter, and lived no one knew how. But starved to it at last, he accepted the gifts and learned to tolerate the givers. Although embittered against the world, his heart was true to his worthless master. 14 months afterward I made his acquaintance. He was still on rigid duty at his post. He had regained his good looks. His bright, keen face, set off by his white ruff and pricked ears, made a dog to catch the eye anywhere. But he gave me no second glance, once he found my legs were not those he sought, and in spite of my friendly overtures during the 10 months following that he continued to watch, I got no farther into his confidence than any other stranger. For 2 whole years did this devoted creature attend that ferry. There was only one thing to prevent him going home to the hills. Not the distance, nor the chance of getting lost, but the conviction that Robin, the godlike Robin, wished him to stay by the ferry, and he stayed. But he crossed the water as often as he felt it would serve his purpose. The fare for a dog was 1 penny, and it was calculated that Wully owed the company hundreds of pounds before he gave up his quest. He never failed to sense every pair of nethers that crossed the gangplank. 6 million legs by computation had been pronounced upon by this expert, but all to no purpose. His unswerving fidelity never faltered, though his temper was obviously souring under the long strain. We had never heard what became of Robin, but one day a sturdy drover stole down the ferry slip, and Wully, mechanically assaying the new personality, suddenly started. His mane bristled, he trembled, a low growl escaped him, and he fixed his every sense on the drover. One of the ferry hands, not understanding, called to the stranger, "Hoot, man, you munna hurt our dog. What's hurting him, you fool? He's more like to hurt me." But further explanation was not necessary. Wully's manner had wholly changed. He fawned on the drover, and his tail was wagging violently for the first time in years. A few words made it all clear. Dorley, the drover, had known Robin very well, and the mittens and the comforter he wore were of Robin's own make, and had once been part of his wardrobe. Wully recognized the traces of his master, and despairing of any nearer approach to his lost idol, he abandoned his post at the ferry and plainly announced his intention of sticking to the owner of the mittens. And Dorley was well pleased to take Wully along to his home among the hills of Derbyshire, where he became once more a sheepdog in charge of a flock. Thank you for listening to Stories from the Hiber-Nation. Comment on the website at grizzliesgrowls.com. This program is offered under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.